Well, hello. Today is a great day to be here, ladies and gentlemen. It is up week for our children and teenagers, which means that they get to go to their next grade level, and for some of them, that means changing classes. It's also the kickoff for happy hour, which is our Weekends on Wednesday meal right before the service around 6 o'clock, so I know some of the crew here today enjoyed that. It also is the kickoff today of a brand new series called Old School, and the best thing about it is every single week we're going to show you some of the cheesiest and most ridiculous videos that we've come across that were designed and built years ago, so just get ready for some classics. Now, the reason that we are calling this Old School is because each week of the series, what we're going to do is we are going to look at stories and individuals from the Old Testament. And if you are a little intimidated by the Old Testament and maybe a little bit lost on what that's all about, you don't have to be. Let me just walk through some things with you on the Old Testament. All right, this gives you an overview of the Bible. The Bible is a library of 66 books. Okay, it's not just one book, it's a library of books, different genres. So you've got poetry, history, letters, etc. It's written by roughly 40 authors over a period of about 1,600 years. The Bible is divided into two sections, Old Testament and New Testament. All right, so let's just focus on the Old Testament. The Old Testament contains 39 books. The other 27 are in the New Testament. Okay, but it contains 39 books. The Old Testament is the Hebrew Bible, which means not only was it written in Hebrew, but this was the Bible for Jesus. It was the Bible that the Apostle Paul used, the early church leaders used. And the Old Testament, what it does is it places a lot of emphasis on the Jewish people and God's promise to use them in blessing the world, primarily through Jesus. All right, so that's a quick little glimpse at what the Old Testament is. A lot of focus on the Jewish people, and again, how God's going to use them to bless the world. If you've ever read the Old Testament, you know that some of the stories are a little overwhelming. And some of the laws we come across seem really, really outdated and archaic, and they are. I mean, they're thousands of years old, but a lot of the reason that we get confused and almost overwhelmed sometimes reading the Old Testament is because we don't understand the culture and we don't understand the context. But at the same time, as it may be difficult to understand the Old Testament, at the same time, it's important for us to understand that we can pull amazing lessons from some of the individuals that we read about and some of the stories that we come across. And so the big idea of this series is that the more you know about the past, the better prepared you are for the future. So that's where we are headed. Now, as we get started today, I want to start the way I do every single week, and that's I want to welcome all of our campuses. And so I want to say to our Kenosha campus, hello to you, Racine campus, our online campus, and of course, our Weekends on Wednesday service. Wow, the energy. It is overwhelming. And actually today, I also want to do a really special shout out and hello to our friends at Westbridge Church right outside of Minneapolis. That's being led by my buddy Jeremiah Kern and his wife Cherry. And so we've been connected and networked for a very long time. And then also I want to say hello to our friends at Eastlake Church in Eastern Washington, in Tri-Cities, with my friend Brent Johnson, his wife Kylie. I don't know if you realize this, but we are actually networked with a lot of great churches. We're not in a denomination, but we're in a network of pastors that get together and we pray for one another, we cheer each other on, and we make a whole lot of fun of each other. All right, so that's the kind of network that we're a part of. Now, most of us early on in life became very familiar with children's stories and nursery rhymes and lullabies. All right, it's just something we learned very early on, whether it was Little Miss Muffet, or Skip to My Lou, or Itsy Bitsy Spider. Right? Some of the stories and nursery rhymes and lullabies, they were totally innocent, but others, if you really pay attention to the words, they're a little creepy, or they're really, really like discouraging and depressing, right? Like Rockabye Baby. I'm sure we all remember this, right? Rockabye Baby on the treetop. Yeah, now just picture in the tree, right? It's kind of scary, right? When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. It just, when the bough breaks, the cradle will fall, and down will come baby, cradle and all. This is a Stephen King lullaby. I mean, that's really horrible. Who's going to sleep well at night having that spoken to them, right? Or how about Humpty Dumpty, right? He sat on a wall, and then what happened? He had a great fall. And all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put him back together again. The end. That's just the story right there. Wow. Or how about the old lady who lived in a shoe, right? This woman, she lived in a shoe. She had so many kids, she didn't know what to do, right? She was overwhelmed, so she gave them some broth without any bread, then whipped them all soundly and put them to bed. That's abuse right there. Or how about anybody remember Rub-a-Dub-Dub 3? Man, I don't even want to go there. I don't even want to go there. So as much as we want for every story to end happily ever after, we know not every story is a lullaby, right? And the lullabies that life might have from time to time don't always end with rainbows and unicorns and cotton candy. I mean, life isn't always fun. It doesn't always unfold the way we want it to. It doesn't always meet our expectations. Now, maybe that's where you're at today. Maybe you're in a season of life that you never imagined and you never pictured. And it frustrates you because you're praying super hard and you're working super hard and you're bringing your best energy and your best emotions and you're trying to develop good and godly habits in your life. But the reality is, you're stuck. Maybe the past 4 years you've been a college student, so you've been able to say, I'm an engineering major, or I'm an education major, or I'm getting a degree in such and such, and now you're graduated. The big day has come and gone, but you can't seem to find a job that really connects with the degree you just got. And so what you're doing right now is you're just working the same job that you had before you went off to college for the same amount of money, and you're just in the season where you feel stuck. And of course, it's not just college students who get stuck, right? Maybe it's possible that you're a realtor, and we're in this what seems to be amazing economy, and maybe you look at your colleagues and it's like they're selling a home a week, they're selling 3 or 4 a month, maybe 5 or 6, but you're looking at your record and this is the worst year you've had, and you can't pinpoint it, you can't connect the dots, and you're saying, man, I've sold 4 all year, and I've got colleagues who are selling them once a week. What's going on? And it doesn't make sense to you, and you just wonder, have I lost the edge, and do I need to find another career? And you just feel stuck. Or maybe you're in a season of life where you thought, man, I should have lots more freedom than I currently have. Because you're watching the people you love and the people you're close to get really, really sick, and some of them are even passing away. And so you're spending this season that you thought you'd have all this freedom, you're spending this season taking care of people and trying to help people and trying to really be there for them. You just feel stuck. Or maybe you're a parent, and every time that you walk through your house, you have pictures of your child when they were 6 or 7 years old, and they had the biggest cheesy grin on their face, and it was obvious that they were so happy. But now that same child is 16 years old or 17 or 18 years old, and something's different. They seem to be angry. There seems to be a bitterness about them. There's a disconnect from the family, and you're doing all you can to just keep the family together, and you just feel stuck. When you feel stuck, you use words like for now. Right? For now, I'm living with my parents. For now, I'm working part-time, but I'm hoping to get into my career pretty soon. For now, I'm just trying to make the most of the situation. Life doesn't always follow our expectations. And it's easy for any of us to get stuck in this place between where we used to be and where we hope to be. And so today what I want to do is I want to look at a story in the Bible that deals with this very issue. It's a story that took place roughly 3,300 years ago and centers around an individual by the name of Moses. Now, even if you're not a church person, my guess is that you have heard of Moses, because this dude is pretty famous, Right? There are songs that have been sung about Moses. There are stories that have been told about him. There are movies that have been made about him. When Moses was a young man, he had a very privileged life. Right? He grew up in a palace. He had lots of friends. He had lots of influence. He had many opportunities, lots of connections. But one day, all of that changed. When Moses was 40 years old, he made a destructive life decision. He saw an Egyptian mistreating an Israelite, and this feeling of justice just overcame him. And so he decided to take justice in his own hands, and he ends up killing the Egyptian. He doesn't think anybody's seen him do it, but sure enough, a day, 2 days later, he hears rumors out there that he killed this Egyptian. And since he knows the rumors are true, he knows, hey, if I don't get out of town, people are going to come after me. And so that's what he does. He flees Egypt as a fugitive. He realized there's going to be some retribution if he doesn't get away. And so Moses leaves Egypt and he travels about 300 miles to this area known as Midian. Okay? Now, this may not seem all that far, but it's roughly the same distance from Chicago to Louisville. So Moses flees to Midian, and while he's there, he meets a young lady, he falls in love, and he gets married. And of course, he needs a job to support his wife and to support his family, and so he ends up working for his father-in-law, watching sheep. This is what Moses does for the next 40 years of his life. Now, I'm about to tell a story that gets a little dramatic. And because we weren't there and because it's in the Bible, sometimes we can read these things and they can feel a little bit like fairy tales and, oh, that's a nice little story. But man, we have the names of mountains in this story. We have the names of different locations. It's a story that unfolded 3,300 years ago, and it is a story that, as hard as it is to wrap our minds around, is a story that has the power to impact our lives even today. So here's the deal. Moses is on this mountain one day, and he is walking around in this mountain with sheep that he is overseeing, and he has a dramatic encounter with God in which it becomes very, very obvious that God has a special plan and a special call for Moses' life. Now, if you're like me, whenever you hear that somebody has a dramatic encounter with God and that God speaks something to them, you start to get a little skeptical, right? You wonder, what's Moses smoking? Is he drinking something? What is it? Because you just kind of think that when someone says, God spoke to me, you're like, okay, you're not all there. Or what does that mean, God spoke to you? But I do believe God speaks to people, and he speaks to people in different ways. God speaks to us sometimes when we read the ancient scriptures, and he makes them come alive. God can speak to us through family and through friends. God can speak to us through circumstances. God can speak to us by, for lack of a better word, a feeling. In fact, the primary way that God has spoken to me throughout my life, in fact, even when starting this church, was this restlessness that I couldn't explain. And there have been many times in my life where I felt restless for so long, not a day, not 2 days, but just for such a long time that I just started to feel like this has to be God. And so that's how I sense God speaking. But in this case, it's a very dramatic thing that Moses cannot deny. And in this dramatic experience, Moses learns that he is supposed to return to Egypt. Now remember, he's a fugitive. But he's supposed to return to Egypt, and he's supposed to play a key role in leading the people of Israel, a couple 100,000 of them. Some scholars say upwards of 1 million. But several 100,000 of them, he's supposed to lead them out of Egypt where they have been slaves for 400 years. And he's supposed to lead them into an area and into a land that God has promised to them. Now, again, this can be hard to wrap our mind around. And because of culture, we put things into our mind. In fact, if you've ever watched Prince of Egypt, it's easy to picture Moses as a strapping young man, right? If he did his hair a little bit different, maybe got some new clothes, we could put him up on a billboard and he can model something. But this is not what Moses looked like. Because at this time in Moses' life, he is not 40 years old. This is maybe what he looked like when he took out of Egypt. At this point in Moses' life, he's 80 years old, so he would look way more like this. Right now, Letterman is 71 years old, so add 9 years to this cat. All right, this is what Moses would have looked like. And here is how the story unfolds in Exodus chapter 3. Then the Lord told Moses, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering, so I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people Israel out of Egypt. Yay! I love this. I mean, God says, hey, Moses, just so you know, I'm aware that Israel has been in slavery for 400 years. I'm very cognizant of their situation, and now it's time to rescue them. And from what we read, God says to Moses, it pretty much sounds like everything is just going to happen like that. Boom, boom, boom. But that's not how the story unfolds. What happens is Moses goes back to Egypt, and it takes several months and a series of miracles for Pharaoh to finally get to the point, the ruler of Egypt, for him to finally get to the point of saying, all right, just get out of here. You can leave. Now, as you can imagine, when that day happened, when they were allowed to leave, there was a lot of celebration. There were high fives, there were secret handshakes, they were partying because for 400 years they had been in slavery, which means it was the only thing that they ever knew. And it was the only thing that their ancestors, right, their parents and grandparents had ever known. So when they left Egypt, they were leaving behind slavery. They hated that life. They were told what to do, when to do. They were told when to get up, when to go to bed. They hated all that. At the same time, they were leaving behind a very fertile area. Because the Nile River is in Egypt, and it flows throughout that country, and so it's a very, it's a place that's very easy to grow fruits and vegetation. That's what they leave behind. And they're on their way to another land. This is the land that God promised them. This is the land of Canaan. It's, again, a very fertile area. It's an area where fruits and vegetation are everywhere. Now, to really appreciate this, we have to look at this on a map. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to just look at it here on the map. You've got Egypt. You see all the green there, right? This is where they left. And, of course, Canaan, all this green, is where they're going. But where does that put Israel? Where are they right now? Well, they're right here in this desert. That's the location they're at. Not where they were and not where they're going. They're just in the middle of the desert. And of course, they're thinking, well, we're going to be here for a couple days, but those days turn into weeks. And then those weeks turn into months, and eventually those months turn into years, and they are stuck. And nothing is happening quickly, and life is not meeting their expectations. Now, you know this because of your own life and the expectations that haven't been met in your own life. But when life doesn't meet our expectations, it is very easy to become emotional. It is very easy when life feels like it's just stuck and it's going nowhere. It's very easy to start being plagued with doubts and with questions. Because deserts are a tough place to live. They're a wasteland. Nothing grows in the desert. People die in the desert. They are very, very difficult to survive in. They're filled with all sorts of challenges. But as we read the story of the Israelites, we learn that even though there's not a whole lot of things that grow in the desert, the truth is the desert is fertile ground for a couple of different things. And we're going to look at those things. But before we do, I want to do a quick little rewind. All right, because I realized I went through a whole lot of information very quickly, and so let's just walk through this as just kind of a refresh here. Moses grew up in a very privileged household. At the age of 40, he kills an Egyptian. Out of fear, Moses flees to Midian, which is 300 miles away from Egypt. Moses meets a young lady, he falls in love, and he gets married. Moses works for his father-in-law watching sheep. He does that the next 40 years. So at the age of 80, Moses returns to Egypt to lead the Israelites from slavery into freedom. It takes several months and many miracles for the ruler of Egypt to let the Israelites leave. Now, eventually they do leave. And again, it's a very exciting time for Israel. There's just one problem. They are living in the desert. This was their home. Not for a day, not for a week, not for a month. This was their home for years. Now, I don't think I need to say this, but I'm going to say it anyways. Life is filled with deserts. Life is filled with seasons that are difficult, that are challenging, that are unproductive. There are times in life that we just feel like, man, nothing's happening. This is barren. It's dry. I'm giving it my efforts. I'm praying as hard as I can, but yet no fruit is being produced. And so even though it's difficult for things to grow in physical deserts and in the deserts of life, we do know this about deserts. They are fertile ground for some things. The deserts of life are fertile ground for complaints. Now we see this with the Israelites. They're in a desert, several 100,000 of them, and there's not a place to just plant gardens and wait for, overnight, and all of a sudden you're going to have the vegetation that you're hoping for. And so they're concerned about having enough food to survive, understandably. Well, God decides in this moment to show them that he can take care of them. And so he provides a food substance for the Israelites every single day. They would wake up in the morning, go outside their tent, and this food substance would be on the ground. It looked very much like coriander seeds. Okay? So they would pick this stuff up and they would look at it initially, and nobody knew what it was. So they called it manna, which is a Hebrew word. It's actually a question meaning, what is it? It's the same question I ask when I look at the menu of White Castle. Like, what am I eating? Right? And so that's what they ask when they look at the seed. So they called it manna. And manna is what sustained the Israelites while they were in the desert. And it's really cool that God would provide, but here's the deal, is they never got a break from it. So breakfast, lunch, and dinner, manna. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, more manna. And more manna. And more manna. Well, as you can imagine, over time, they just started to hate manna. In fact, here's what we read. The people of Israel began to complain. Oh, for some meat, they exclaimed. We've got to read this kind of in a whiny voice because that's what they're doing. We remember the fish we used to eat for free in Egypt, and we had all the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlics we wanted, but now our appetites are gone. All we ever see is this manna. Now, when I read this, I'm like, are you kidding me? God is miraculously providing for you. How can you not be crazy thankful for what he is doing? Or I get a little self-righteous. I mean, how quickly you forget about what God just did. But let me be clear, this wasn't quick. They're a couple years now into their wilderness experience. This isn't 2 or 3 days into it. This is years into their journey. And it's very possible to read stories like this and place ourselves above the individuals in the stories and say, you should do this and you should do that. But what ought to happen is we ought to place ourselves inside the story and among the people we read about. Because given the right set of circumstances and the right conditions, we're right there with them. Well, they've been eating the same food for years, and so of course they're complaining, but they're not simply complaining about their situation, and they're not just simply complaining about their food. They're actually complaining against God. They're saying we were better off in Egypt. We were better off before God got involved. Now, when life doesn't go the way we plan for it to, and when life isn't moving at the pace we think it should, and we feel stuck, let me tell you, it's very easy to get mad at God. It's very easy to point our fingers and say, I don't need you. It's very easy to say, I'm sick of this. I'm sick and tired of living in my in-laws' basement trying to save money. I'm sick and tired of serving at the church when my own kids want nothing to do with God. I'm sick of being asked what line of work I'm in and constantly fumbling for an answer. I'm sick of this depression and waiting for it to lift. I'm sick of visiting a mother in the nursing home who repeatedly asks who I am. I'm sick of working on this marriage knowing my spouse doesn't even care. Now, I want you to know it's absolutely okay to be frustrated with life and with our circumstances, and it's even okay to be frustrated with God. But we need to be very, very careful in the desert seasons of our life to guard our frustrations, because if we do not, they can lead us to a very dangerous place in our faith. And more so, they can even lead other people to a dangerous place in their faith. In fact, one of the marks of maturity is learning how to go through challenging and difficult times without making the people around us miserable, without making them suffer along with us. So we just have to learn to manage the disappointment and manage the tensions inside of us so that the deserts of life don't create bitterness and resentment inside of us to the point that everyone around us is miserable. Now, as we continue reading the story, we learn this about the deserts of life, is that they're also fertile ground for emotional breakdown. If you live in a desert long enough, if you experience disappointment long enough, eventually it is going to overwhelm you. And so Moses had to listen to these complaints day after day after day. We're tired of manna. We want meat to eat. We're tired of manna. We want meat to eat. You're the leader. And so let's just take the camera for a moment and let's take it off the Israelites and let's put it on to Moses, because he is the man of God. He's the chosen one. Right? He's the special guy. God's put him in that role for a reason. Well, Moses, after hearing all these complaints, is so overwhelmed. Here's the prayer he prays. And Moses said to the Lord, "Why are you treating me, your servant, so harshly? Have mercy on me. What did I do to deserve the burden of all these people? Did I give birth to them? Did I bring them into the world? Why do you tell me to carry them in my arms like a mother carries a nursing baby? How can I carry them to the land you swore to give to their ancestors? Where am I supposed to get meat for all these people? They keep whining to me, saying, 'Give us meat to eat.' I can't carry all these people by myself. The load is far too heavy." When you are in a desert of life and things feel stuck and you're not moving forward, it sets you up for an emotional breakdown. And if that sounds like an exaggeration, just look at what Moses says next. He says, "God, if this is how you intend to treat me, just go ahead and kill me. Do me a favor and spare me this misery." I love it, man. He is having a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. I mean, that's what he's experiencing, right? And he uses this imagery. Am I their mama? Come on, what do you expect? I didn't give birth to all these people. And I kind of wish that Moses lived in the age of Twitter, because we have great pastors and great spiritual leaders in our world who every so often will tweet this amazing quote to try to give everybody encouragement and hope. And it's like when you're in the lowest moment of your life, sometimes that helps and sometimes it doesn't. Like earlier this year, a pastor out of California that I admire, Rick Warren, he tweets this. He says, "Every crisis is a leadership opportunity." Oh, if Moses would have known that, right? Hey, Moses, this is an opportunity. Or Pope Francis just recently tweeted this. He said, "God calls each one of us, and each call is a gift that should fill us with joy." Moses, put a smile on your face. Now, I have a Twitter account. Honestly, I probably tweet about once every other year because I just don't have good stuff like this, right? If I was to tweet something out to Moses, it would be like this: "Give God your troubles and he'll pop them like bubbles." There you go. Now, by the way, we had to make this up. I don't have 10,000 retweets on my Twitter. I promise you that, all right? But let's be honest, these quotes weren't going to help Moses get through what he was going through. He's just saying, "God, it's too heavy, it's too much. I can't do this anymore." Have you ever been there in your life? Are you there now? I was there last summer. So overwhelmed, so burdened, so much stress. A lot of it had to do with parenting, some of it with finances, a lot of it with the church. And it started to take a toll on me, and it started to take a toll on my marriage. And so Rindy and I, my wife, we took a week off, went to Florida, and spent a week with a therapist because the pressure was just too much. And we said, if we don't do this, our marriage isn't going to last. I've talked many times about the pressure this church has been under. You know, it's interesting. We started and it was just like the amazing church launch. I mean, church planners were calling us, people who are starting new church, and they're saying, man, tell us what to do, give us some advice. And for the first 4, 5, 6 years of this church, it was just nonstop momentum and energy, and everything's moving forward. And then 3 years ago, it seems, it just like hit a wall. And our Racine campus ended up moving 4 times in the course of 4 years. And just when that was over, and we're like, oh, finally, a little break, then we were told, hey, Tinseltown Movie Theater, where you've been now for the last 7 years, you can't be here anymore. And so in 1 year, we ended up moving 6 different times. And during those moves, started seeing the numbers drop. And the financial pressure started to grow. And I started to feel a lot like Moses. God, I'm doing this for you. This isn't for me. This is for you. Why do you treat me like this? God, you've got to open some miraculous door for us. I think about our friends at Westbridge Church in Minneapolis, 11 years old. 11 years old, and for 11 years, they have set up and they have torn down week after week after week. And several times in the last couple of years, my buddy Jeremiah has called me. And he said, Dave, we're right there with getting this building. We've got a building on the horizon, man. I think we're going to sign on it. This is exciting. And then he would call me a couple days later and say it fell through. And so here you are 11 years later, and they're still setting up, and they're still tearing down. And they recently went through a big initiative to raise money to finally build their own building. And man, it is just at that final end of it, but there's not a shovel in the ground. They're still dealing with the complexities that come with moving into some huge initiative like that. I think about my friends in the Tri-Cities and the state of Washington. Your pastor must be an angel, because I don't think you guys have ever had a problem, ever. Every time he talks to me, it's about all the good that's happening. Screw you. All right, so most of us, here's the deal. Most of us are prepared for days of disappointment. But I don't think any of us are prepared for years of disappointment. And that's where Moses is at. He's overwhelmed. He says, God, I can't carry this alone. We read, then the Lord said to Moses, gather before me 70 men who are recognized as elders and leaders of Israel. Bring them to the tabernacle to stand there with you. They will bear the burden of the people along with you, so you will not have to carry it alone. Now, get this picture in your mind. When the Israelites were in the wilderness, they ended up being there for 40 years. They didn't have a permanent temple that they could worship God at, and so they had a tabernacle, which was a portable worship facility. It looked like this. It was just set up in the desert. And so God said, bring 70 men who are capable leaders and get them around you. And while he's there, God says, these are the men who are going to help you. They're going to carry the burden with you. I want you to know, in one of the lowest moments in Moses' life, God provides. And here's something else we discover about the deserts of life. They're also fertile ground. They can be fertile ground for complaints and for different things, but they also can be fertile ground for God's provision. I don't know what provision looks like for you in this season of your life, especially if you're in a desert. But God does provide. Maybe he's going to provide you with different employment or better employment. Maybe he's going to provide you with contentment. Maybe he's going to provide you with strength to endure this season of depression you're in. Or maybe he's going to provide you with someone who can give you the right prescription to get you on the right medication in this season. Maybe he can provide you with the right therapist who can give you guidance and wisdom in this season. Maybe he's going to provide you with patience. Maybe his provision is going to come in the form of an encouraging email or phone call, or an eerily timed message that helps you get through this season and is speaking directly to what you are going through. God provides. He always provides. Now, that doesn't mean there's always a bow on the package. It doesn't mean that you're always going to sell your house for more than you're asking. It doesn't always mean that you're going to sell your house. It doesn't always mean that you're going to find the dream job. But God does provide, and he provides for Moses. And then there's a final lesson that we can look at today, and there's many more that we don't have time for, but the deserts of life are fertile ground for transformation and growth. Even after God provides, he provides leadership to help Moses carry the burden. He provides manna for the Israelites. They're still whining, right? They're still complaining. They're still saying, we want Egypt. We want the good old days. And they're still saying, give us meat to eat. We want something new. And so God says to Moses, give the Israelites this message. No, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you just might find you get what you need. Now, that's a summary, but he pretty much quoted the Rolling Stones, all right? God says, if you want meat to eat, I'll give you meat to eat. In fact, I'm going to give you so much meat that you're going to get sick of it. It's going to be disgusting for you. And Moses kind of so skeptical at this point and cynical. He says to God, where are you going to get that kind of meat? How is that even possible? And I love God's response. Then the Lord said to Moses, has my arm lost its power? Has my arm lost its power? In other words, I'm capable, way more capable than you can imagine. There is no reason to question my ability and my competence. But in the deserts of life, it's easy to wonder if God cares and if he's capable and if he's even aware of what we're going through. And it's the deserts of life that we don't think about this at the time, but they often drive us to a deeper level of trust and dependence on God. Right? We want our circumstances to change, but God is way more interested in us changing. We hate the loss. We hate the waiting. We hate the confusion. But often it's in the deserts that we grow and transform the most. When the Israelites first went into the desert, they were not a mature group of people. God knew that they needed time and they needed challenges to become the people he wanted them to become. And so this ancient story, 3,300 years old, is jam-packed with lessons for us today. The more you know about the past, the better prepared you are for the future. Because when you look at the past and you're able to look at some of the lessons, maybe it's a lesson on the faithfulness of God. What it does is it prepares you for future times of being stuck and future seasons of disappointment, because you can say, God was faithful to me in that season. Hey, I'm thinking he's going to be faithful to me in this season. Maybe you learned a lesson, a valuable teaching in the past difficulties you've been through, that now in this season you can say, hey, I'm going to apply what I learned then. I'm going to make sure I don't make the same mistakes I did in that season. The author of Romans says this, as we consider all the things we just talked about written many, many years ago. He says, for everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in the scriptures and the encouragement they provide, we might have hope. And my prayer today is that as you consider the story of Moses and the story of the Israelites and what they went through in the 40 years they spent in the desert, having left behind what they left behind, but looking forward to a better future, 40 years in the desert, that you would be encouraged and you would have hope, and regardless of what situation in life right now that you feel stuck and you feel like you're in this tension of where you've come from and where you're going. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, in whatever situations we're facing and whatever discouragements we're encountering in whatever areas of life we currently feel stuck, I pray that you would give us the patience we need, and that in this season you would teach us the lessons we need to learn. You would give us the wisdom to identify those lessons and the courage to live them out. In Jesus' name, amen.